Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Inner Conquest, the world's greatest modern metaphysics channel. I'm your host, Jacob Edens, and today we're going to be talking about the similarities of learning about what Neville Goddard taught in terms of law of assumption, in terms of Christ, in the same optics as learning a science skill, such as learning mathematics or something of that nature, right? So when you look at the dialogue that is entirely based around scripture being a story about a person who lived many years ago, whether or not that individual lived is up for debate, right? That person most likely lived, but the interpretation of it is been distorted in such a way to where it externalizes the true meaning of scripture and how it's meant to be interpreted, right? So when you have somebody like Neville Goddard come along and they start talking about how reality is constructed and how you can change through radical mental transformations the manifestation of life, that is a process that is inherent to your inner being, if you will, right? So it's not necessarily this crazy high and mighty type of discussion when we talk about things like law of assumption, law of attraction, and how mental mechanics affect the physical reality. It's a much more grounded, practical conversation that we have to understand we've really been fed a lot of distortions about, right? Because if you want to control a soul, the way that you do that is you put that soul into fear, right? So if you have fear clouding your field, your electromagnetic field, you can't receive or operate freely within the third dimensional matrix, if you want to call that, right? So when you look at scripture, what you're basically doing is you're opening a dormant part of yourself that is capable of shifting circumstances from an internal power position, right? So if you look at even something like prayer, like I need to pray to this deity and then I get this, right? The power has been externalized to this thing. So when we look at power externalization, that can also happen with different types of laws, right? Law of assumption, law of attraction, etc., right? If you look for a process and you put your power into the process, it's you putting the power into the process. So that's important to understand because the process in of itself is energized through your awareness and belief structure behind how that process is going to work, right? So you always want to put yourself at the center of the power, right? The power that you put through your consciousness into something energizes that thing and makes that thing work. That's a very, very important thing to understand because without that understanding, it's always process optimization. And there's nothing wrong with process optimization, but what makes a process work in many regards is your self-identity, right? Am I the person who already has this? Am I a powerful person? Am I a person who creates their own reality? Getting these fundamental assumptions in alignment first makes processes work or not work. So when we talk about Christ, it's really like learning about mathematics. It's about learning the input-output equations of how this reality in this type of construct is worked in and navigated with the rules of the game, if you will, right? So when you take your consciousness and you start at level 0, which is essentially you're born, you're completely asleep, you have no idea who you are on the other side of the human experience, and then you start to slowly run into challenges and things that you can't solve through third dimensional action, right? Especially with the atrophy of this world, right? Things are always falling apart and things like that, right? So you're like, oh my God, I got to figure out how to conquer this game, right? So as you start to do that, you go through the process of beginning to become aware of some of the different modalities of how you can change and manipulate reality, right? In that first phase is you'll go through that and you will essentially try out the different processes and find processes that kind of work and some of them don't, right? The real hinge point, the real change point is understanding that your assumption about whether or not those processes work is the fundamental engine and or driver that makes the process work, right? And this is kind of annoying because you're just like, dude, why isn't there just a good process that works? But if you look at something like the split wave particle test, right, depending on how the particle is observed, the particle moves differently, right? So the observer has an effect based off of their inherent biased perception of how something is going to play out that actually affects the reality. So putting yourself at the center is important because that's how you gain the ability to make things work by commanding that they work, right? And what will happen is if you're not at the point to where you feel comfortable commanding, it's because there are fear elements that are basically lingering in the field of your electromagnetic space that need to be released, right? So once you begin to release these unnecessary fear, you can call it paradigms or whatever you want to do, you start to open up more energy and more space for you to be able to not only hold more information in your physical body, but also to remember the mental mechanics of how reality is constructed from a baseline reality standpoint, right? So with that being said, using things like law of assumption, law of attraction, you could think about it like if you're doing kung fu, right? There's many different ways to beat your opponent, but you may prefer karate, you may prefer jujitsu, you may prefer all of these different things, right? I like law of assumption and I like law of attraction because they allow you to mentally place yourself at the end scenarios of things that you may not have a depth of understanding of how that process is going to be completed, but you can reliably and consistently manipulate reality to fold time and space to achieve whatever ends you want, right? So that's why understanding that you empower the process is the first really big lever that you can swing, because once you understand that you're the power, right? Your consciousness, even with your body, right? If you go into your body and you leave your body dies, right? So your body exists 100% because you are inhabiting it, right? So if you think about a belief system, that belief system is alive because you are inhabiting it, right? If you have a fear, that fear exists because you are inhabiting it, right? So once you reframe that power position, you want to get to a state where it's much more about choosing what you want rather than having to do something to get something. Because if you can break that ideation that this process is what I need to do and reframe that with this process suits me well and I choose this process because I like it, that process becomes much more endurable or much more easy for you to basically repeat and consistently get results with, right? So like if you have something as simple as an affirmation, if you have a strong conscious state that nothing works out for you, the affirmation will not work, right? If you have a assumption, but you have massive doubts behind it, the doubts must be cleared first, right? And the easiest way to do that is to simply understand that you are the entity, if you will, that is a creator being. And by the right of your awareness and who you're aware of being, you can energize constructs or de-energize constructs through your indifference to them, right? So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I just wanted to riff a little bit about how when you start to use these processes, they are tools. They're not the power behind them, right? You are the power behind them. You choose the tools, you energize the tools, and that comes from the self-concept of understanding, much like how you inhabit your body, that you are the source of your reality. You are the operant power. So I appreciate you guys. I love you guys. If you guys want coaching, click the link tree. Other than that, click the comments, leave videos that you want made, and I hope to see you in the next one. Go Conquer.